Welcome to the Deep Dive. We delve into sources to pull out the key knowledge just for you.
And today, we're tackling a big one. Niall Ferguson's epic, The House of Rothschild. Both volumes. It's quite the story.
It really is. Our mission here is to unpack how the Rothschilds built, well, essentially the first international banking network. We're talking 5 cities: Frankfurt, London, Paris.
Naples and Vienna, right?
Yeah.
And for a long time, certainly up until the 1860s or so, they weren't just separate branches. They really functioned as one multinational bank, very interconnected.
Exactly. So we'll look at how they financed wars across borders, how they dipped their toes into industrial investments, and, how they became this huge symbol of elite finance, but also philanthropy.
And importantly, we want to pull the insights for you today. Lessons on, say, long-term thinking, managing risk, global strategy, things that still really matter.
Definitely. Okay, so let's start right at the source. Frankfurt, the Judengasse.
Right. The Frankfurt Jewish quarter in the mid-18th century, it was physically restrictive, no doubt about it. But it also created this incredibly tight-knit community. Only about 110 Jewish inhabitants lived there then, actually.
Wow, that's small.
It is. And this is the world that Mayor Amschel, the founder, grew up in. It definitely shaped him, the limitations, but maybe also a certain kind of security within that community.
And he showed business smarts early on, didn't he? Selling rare coins and metals.
Yes, he had an eye for value. And then came that connection with William, the hereditary prince of Hesse-Kassel. It started small, apparently a deal in 1765 for just, what was it, 38 gulden?
Pocket change, almost.
Pretty much,
Yeah.
but it grew. By 1769, he was appointed a court agent. That royal connection was, well, invaluable, a huge step up.
And he solidified things with a strategic marriage, too, right?
Absolutely. In 1770, he married Guttel Schnapper. Her dowry was significant for the time, 2,400 gulden. But it wasn't just the money, it set this precedent for the family. Build alliances, consolidate wealth through kinship. It's a core part of their strategy right from the beginning.
Okay, so foundation laid in Frankfurt, then Nathan makes the move to England. Was he an instant success in London?
Oh, not at all. Ferguson paints a picture of real struggle initially. Nathan was basically a merchant dealing with all the headaches, unreliable suppliers, difficult customers, bankers, the whole 9 yards.
He even tried manufacturing. I read about a copying machine.
Yeah, he diversified, tried different things, bought that machine, formed partnerships, traded goods. It shows he wasn't afraid to pivot, to try things beyond just, say, coin dealing. He was already moving towards what we'd call merchant banking.
And his letters from that time, they sound pretty intense, very driven.
Definitely. He was demanding, pushing manufacturers for speed, better terms, always hitting at bigger future business if they delivered. You get a real sense of his ambition, his aggressive style. It was probably necessary to make his mark in London.
So Mayor Amschel has this vision. Nathan's building things in London. How did the 5-city network actually take shape?
Well, this was the master plan, really. Mayor Amschel sent each of his 5 sons to a key European hub. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt, Nathan was in London, James went to Paris, Karl to Naples, and Salomon set up in Vienna.
And you mentioned earlier they operated almost as one entity.
For decades, yes. Until the mid-19th century, they were effectively a single multinational bank. Close collaboration, profit sharing. They even held shares in each other's houses way into the early 20th century. Think about managing that coordination back then. No email, no instant communication.
It's staggering. And they understood the power game early on, too. It wasn't just about money.
Not at all. Mayor Amschel knew the importance of political connections back in Frankfurt, cultivating people like Karl Buderus, the elector's advisor. His sons absolutely continued that. They understood that finance and politics were, well, 2 sides of the same coin, really. You needed influence in both spheres.
Which brings us to the Napoleonic Wars. This seems like a crucial period for them, Nathan's connection with John Charles Harries.
Yes, the British Commissary General. Starting around 1813, this relationship became pivotal. It led to their first official gig for the British government, you could say.
Which was?
A really sensitive, high-stakes operation, collecting French gold and silver up to 600,000 pounds worth to secretly fund Wellington's army invading France.
Wow. Across enemy lines.
Exactly. Huge risk. Nathan took it on, arranging the collection and transport. His commission was 2%, but only if he delivered successfully. It wasn't just the fee, it proved their unique capability. Nobody else could really do that reliably.
And they weren't just moving British money, right? They helped channel subsidies to allies.
That's right. Britain was funding allies like Russia, Prussia, Austria, but getting the money there was the challenge. The Rothschilds became the essential pipeline. and they earned hefty commissions for it. Ferguson mentions maybe 8% on the first Russian subsidy payment.
What does that tell you about finance back then?
It shows how fragmented things were. State systems just couldn't handle these complex cross-border payments efficiently or discreetly. The Rothschild network filled a massive gap. They were indispensable.
They even got involved in managing exchange rates, keeping sterling stable.
Yeah, which is fascinating. There's a letter from Amschel back in 1811 worrying that James in Paris might be pushing the exchange rate too high with his operations. They were aware of their own market impact very early on.
So they could move huge sums without crashing the currency.
Apparently so. Harry's himself was amazed. Nathan could shift something like 700,000 pounds for him without disrupting the market much. That shows incredible sophistication and, frankly, power.
Then Napoleon escapes Elba in 1815. Waterloo is coming. How did they react?
Nathan reacted fast, switched focus immediately to getting bullion hard cash, gold coins, directly to Wellington's army. We're talking enormous sums, over 2 million pounds in gold. This cemented their reputation. In a crisis, you called the Rothschilds.
But it wasn't always smooth sailing internally, was it? Nathan seems to have been quite dominant.
Oh, definitely. Being in London, which was becoming the world's financial center, and having that assertive personality, his brothers and others even compared him to Napoleon. They called him the commanding general. There was an agreement in 1815 to formalize how profits were shared. But yeah, Nathan was clearly the driving force.
It raises interesting questions about family businesses, doesn't it? Managing leadership in a global setup.
For sure. Especially when the stakes are that high and things are growing so fast. How do you keep everyone aligned, but also empower local leadership? It's a timeless challenge.
Okay, so Napoleon's defeated, the wars are over, they've built this incredible network and reputation. How did they transition to peacetime? Did they just keep financing governments?
Well, yes, government finance remained key, but they expanded their influence. Salomon setting up shop in Vienna was strategically vital. Austria was central to the post-Napoleonic order, the German Confederation.
Was it easy for him to get established there?
Not initially. They were actually excluded from some big Austrian state loans at first. But Salomon persevered, cultivated the court, particularly Metternich, and the breakthrough came with some lottery loans in 1820. That really cemented their position in Vienna.
And they were involved elsewhere politically, too. Italy, Spain.
Yes, they financed Austrian interventions in Italy, navigated the tricky situation around the Spanish Revolution. They were deeply woven into the political machinations of Restoration Europe.
Then there was the financial crisis of 1825 in London. How did that affect them?
It was a big test. Nathan seems to have been worried beforehand about the return to gold convertibility and how trade policies were causing gold to flow out of Britain. When the crisis hit, James in Paris sent significant support to Nathan in London. It really highlights the strength of that family network. They could back each other up in tough times.
That internal support system was crucial.
Absolutely. It's a lesson in resilience, right? Having those internal shock absorbers.
And all this financial muscle translated into social standing. Getting titles, hosting dignitaries.
Oh, yes. Metternich, the Austrian chancellor, arguably the most powerful man in Europe, was accepting Rothschild hospitality. Then, in 1822, all 5 brothers were granted the title of Baron by the Austrian emperor. These weren't just symbolic gestures.
It signaled real arrival.
Completely. Salomon was giving Metternich cash for personal use. James was hosting meetings at the Holy Alliance powers in Paris. They were operating at the very highest levels of European society and politics.
But despite all that influence, achieving rights for Jewish people, even in their home city of Frankfurt, was still a struggle.
A huge struggle. This is a really important point Ferguson makes. Amschel worked hard on it, used his connections, but the Frankfurt authorities only granted minimal concessions. They didn't have to return to the ghetto physically, but many legal and social restrictions stayed in place for decades.
So financial power didn't just sweep away prejudice.
Not automatically, no.
Yeah.
Full legal equality in Frankfurt didn't happen until 1864. It shows the limits of financial influence when faced with deeply entrenched social attitudes.
And around this time, after 1824, they started marrying within the family much more. Cousins marrying cousins.
Yes, a very high proportion of marriages were between cousins. The poet Heine called it complicated knots. It was a deliberate strategy.
Why? To keep the wealth and control inside the family.
Exactly. To prevent dilution of ownership, maintain unity, keep the business secrets tightly held. It was about ensuring the dynasty's continuity and control across generations. A very different model from, say, modern public companies.
Okay, let's talk about information. Their communication network is almost mythical. Was it really like a private spy agency?
Huh. The spy agency idea is probably stretching it, but their communication was exceptionally good for the era. It wasn't magic, it was organization and investment. They relied heavily on their own network of private couriers.
Faster than the regular mail.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
These couriers constantly crisscrossed Europe, carrying letters not just with financial data, but market sentiment, political news, sometimes even messages between European leaders passed via the Rothschilds. That speed gave them a huge information advantage.
How fast are we talking?
Well, Ferguson mentions things like Paris to Frankfurt potentially in 48 hours back in 1814. London to Frankfurt might take a week, but Nathan, especially, was always trying to speed things up, paying extra for express post, using agents at key points.
And wasn't there a clever trick Amschel used with envelopes?
Ah, yes, the colored envelopes. Apparently, he arranged with the Frankfurt post office that different colored envelopes signaled whether the exchange rate was rising or falling, saved crucial time in reacting to market moves.
That's brilliant. So their letters weren't just data, they were analysis and influence.
Precisely. They shared insights, interpreted events for each other, and because they were communicating with ministers and monarchs, their correspondence became a channel to convey their own views to the powerful. In today's terms, think of it as a proprietary real-time intelligence and influence network.
Okay, moving beyond government bonds and wartime finance, they started looking at industry, railways.
Cautiously at first. Their natural inclination was towards the perceived safety of state debt rather than, risky private railway shares. But James in Paris, he saw the potential, particularly a railway connecting Paris to Belgium, strategically important.
And he got involved in the Chemin de Fer du Nord, the Nord Railway.
Yes, significantly. He became a major investor, and it turned out to be a very successful venture. He showed they were willing to move into new areas, albeit carefully.
They also invested in coal mines in Belgium.
Right. Which makes sense, doesn't it? Coal fuels the railways. They saw the connection, the synergy. It's early industrial integration, in a way.
And then 1848 hits revolutions across Europe. How did that impact them?
It was definitely disruptive, no question. Markets panicked, governments wobbled. But the network itself, being diversified across those 5 cities, proved quite resilient overall. Some houses were hit harder than others, but the overall structure survived the turmoil. It kind of proved the strength of that multinational model again.
As their wealth just grew and grew, they inevitably became this symbol, didn't they, of massive elite wealth.
Absolutely. Unprecedented levels of wealth for a private family. And with that came a growing role in philanthropy, although Ferguson's early volumes give fewer specifics on that compared to later periods.
But they were involved in the arts, patronage.
Oh, yes. They were financing musicians. Johann Strauss Sr., for example, banking for stars like Rossini and Paganini. It's a classic pattern, perhaps immense new wealth, seeking cultural validation, connecting with the arts. James also had these complex relationships with writers like Heine and Balzac, who wrote about him, sometimes critically.
And they still dealt in risky government debt sometimes, not just the blue chip stuff.
Right. They weren't afraid of speculation when the potential returns were high enough. Ferguson mentions dealings in Portuguese bonds, for instance, which were pretty much junk bonds at the time. High risk, high reward.
Also things like mercury mining in Spain.
Yes, the Almaden mercury mines. Another example of getting involved in industries tied to political concessions and complex financing. It wasn't just banking, it was this blend of finance, industry, and political maneuvering.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. We've covered a lot of ground. Frankfurt, the Five Sons, wartime finance, politics, industry. What are the big takeaways for someone listening today? The enduring lessons?
I think the first one has to be long-term strategy. I mean, this wasn't built overnight. Amschel had a vision, and it was executed over generations. Family unity was core to that. It really speaks to the power of patient capital and generational planning, something maybe less common today.
That's a great point. What else? Risk? They seemed comfortable with risk, but calculated risk.
Exactly. Risk management is key. Financing Wellington was risky, but they understood the parameters, the potential rewards. They diversified, balanced state bonds with eventually some industrial ventures and even those speculative bonds. It's about understanding your risk appetite and managing different types of risk within a portfolio. Still totally relevant.
And their global perspective right from the start.
Absolutely. Pioneers in global investment and cross-border finance, they had to navigate incredibly complex international politics alongside the finance. Today's global investors face different complexities, maybe, but the principle of understanding that interplay between geopolitics and markets remains crucial.
You can't separate them.
You really can't.
Yeah.
Then there's the importance of networks. Their family network was obviously unique, built on blood and trust, but also the political and business networks they actively cultivated. It underlines that success, especially on a global scale, rarely happens in isolation. Building and maintaining strong networks is vital.
True in any field, really. And finally, maybe their ability to change.
Yes, adaptability. They started as merchants, coin dealers. They became financiers, then the merchant bankers, then industrial investors. They adapted to wars, crises, changing political landscapes. That ability to evolve, to learn, to pivot, it's essential in any era, maybe especially in ours, where change feels so constant.
So long-term vision, managing risk, global thinking, strong networks, and adaptability. Those seem like powerful lessons drawn from just the early history.
Definitely. When you step back and look at how they built this incredible financial powerhouse from relatively humble beginnings in the Frankfurt Judengasse, those principles really stand out. They were operating in a different world, of course, but the underlying strategic thinking holds up remarkably well.
So a final thought for you, the listener. Reflecting on the Rothschild story, how do those principles resonate with your own world? What kind of long-term vision guides you? How are you building your networks, managing risk, and adapting to the shifts around you? The Rothschild legacy isn't just history. It's a fascinating case study with enduring relevance.
It really is.
Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We highly recommend Neil Ferguson's books if you want to go even deeper into this incredible story.